Right, Alex Pereira versus Jiří Procházka. One thing I'm going to say about the card quickly. The days of a guy like Matt Chanel dropping a Brandon Royval is over, and I'm bringing that up to you because knockouts just seem like they can't really happen unless there's a guy with serious amounts of power for their weight class because of the new gloves. I've said it before, but I've got to say it again. But anyways, Alex Pereira. Oh my God. He pretty much bullied Jiří Procházka out of there because all Jiří Procházka can do in his fights is pretty much do a lot of level changing, hands down, wild, he calls it like a samurai type of fighting. That will not work against a Ghemmouri kickboxing champion, but he never learns. And I don't know why more people didn't see this. A lot of people did, but there was a few that didn't. And I say that because go back and look at his fight with Rakic. This guy gets hit way too much. Like, if that was Alex Pereira in that fight against Rakic, he would have been ironed out in the first round. Because all Jiří Procházka's doing, like I keep mentioning, is exploding into the pocket. So yeah, if he catches you on the chin, it's dangerous, which he did earlier on in the fight with like a hook. But every time he kind of comes into range, he leaves his chin wide open when he throws jabs because his hands are down. Sometimes he'll bring up his guard, but he doesn't hold a tight enough guard. And one thing I've noticed with Alex Pereira, as good as his striking defense is below the body, one thing I have noticed, to the head, his striking defense isn't amazing. But because of how powerful that left hook is, how powerful the leg kicks are, every punch he throws pretty much can do damage, whether it's a body shot. And it still makes me question, how did Adesanya do it? Well, we all know why he did it. He did it because it was at middleweight and he was strained. But then, if you look back at the first fight in the UFC, you'd be like, he was outpoint striking Alex Pereira at times. But then again, he had to mix up a bit of grappling. And then as the fight kept growing, he was kind of crumbling a little bit, like we saw in round 5 of Adesanya. I had it 2-2. I've mentioned that multiple times. But anyway, another thing about Alex Pereira that I've got to say right now. I am begging we don't get too excited and throw him into heavyweight this quick. Because I still think there's matchups at light heavyweight that I want to see. Well, only one matchup that I want to see before you move him there. And that fight right there, Muhammad Ankalaev, do not run away from that guy. He shouldn't be scared of him. But one thing I will say, Alex Pereira is beating all of these strikers. And if you want to bring up the Jan Blachowicz where he took the back of Alex Pereira, Jan Blachowicz is one of those guys who, before that fight, only on average probably attempted 0.5 takedowns a fight. So most fights he wouldn't even go for takedowns. So when he goes on Alex Pereira, he pretty much just takes the back. He doesn't really go for proper takedowns until like round 3. And at that point, the fight's over. And that's why I'm saying give him the grappler, because we have seen multiple times now he's knocking out these strikers, which is great. But we need to see him fight against a light heavyweight who's actually going to look for takedowns. And that's why I'm saying Ankalaev, Abu Dhabi is where it probably might happen or something, because that toe's going to keep him out for a while. And for Jiří Procházka, we've got to look at that Jamal Hill fight. But then again, he keeps pulling out a fight, so I don't even know. And he's still talking about how it's not over with Alex Pereira. In my opinion, there's no point begging for that fight. That fight's long and gone now, because after he makes his next fight, he's probably going up to heavyweight anyway. And I wouldn't say his resume is better than John Jones. I'm hearing a bit of people getting a bit excited. I wouldn't go to that point yet. But he's building up the legacy, and it looks very good because Jiří Procházka's the guy always finishing people. Yet he hits them with a head kick and he's out cold because, again, he doesn't know how to block properly. Or it's not that he doesn't know, he chooses not to do that. And with the grappling as well, I'm not convinced yet. I'm really not. I know Jiří Procházka went for the clinch, but he wasn't looking like he was going low to reach for like a double. It was like a lot of clinching. And he was trying to like figure out what to do with Alex Pereira with his back in the cage. It looked like there was no like decision of what to do with him. That's why I want to see a guy like Ankalaev who early on in a fight will explode into takedowns. I know in the Jan Blachowicz fight, not so much. But then in the Johnny Walker fight, you saw him immediately shoot into that takedown. And I think he would do something similar against Alex Pereira. And again, I think that's a bad matchup for him if he does that. But if he stays on the feet for more than a round, we're looking at an early knockout because he will chew up his legs worse than what Jan Blachowicz did by far. But then I do fear with Alex Pereira, what are you going to do when you have a guy who's not looking for submissions, so he's pretty much looking for control. And I think Ankalaev, when he gets you down, he can have good control. He's not one of those guys hunting submissions where you're going to lose positions and get reversed, because if he gets reversed on the ground, Pereira will stand up. But he's one of those grapplers where one of these Dagestanis who love to hug onto the legs, as McGregor would say, and pretty much just hold you there, not do too much damage, but do enough so that the referee don't stand you up. And that's why I want to see that compared to him immediately moving up to heavyweight, because I still think we'll never see this fight. But a Nikita Krylov, if he uses his brain, that would be a horrible matchup for Pereira. But because I don't trust his IQ, sometimes Krylov would get knocked out on the feet. He would end up trying to strike and getting confident like his Curtis Blades and get ironed out. But if he was smart, he would take a guy like Alex Pereira down. That's why I'm saying there are matchups against grapplers which we are yet to see with Alex Pereira, which is why I'm not immediately jumping and getting all excited about this. Yeah, it was a very good knockout, but if he goes out there and beats an elite wrestler, now we're talking about a guy who is moving up in the GOAT debate, because everyone complains about how Khabib was just beating strikers when he was a grappler. But I'm not going to compare him to Khabib because, again, he's moved up the weight class. Khabib didn't want to do that. And I give Alex Pereira more credit than a guy like Khabib because he didn't retire too early and he's still old and he's still doing it in a heavier weight class at an older age. But I'm just saying, I want to see Alex Pereira fight against a grappler. And then after that, then we can start talking about how good was he on like the GOAT debate and that type of stuff. And then even then, if he moves up to heavyweight, you've got some hard matches, because I think a Tom Aspinall, for me, is a very hard matchup for him. The only way it becomes a winnable matchup, if Aspinall thinks, oh, look what he did to Pavlovich. If I'm doing it to him, I'm going to do it with Alex Pereira. That would not work, because one thing about Pavlovich is he's got that long reach, and Alex Pereira, he's so much faster. Like, the way he can snap out that kick, I think he would look faster than Tom Aspinall in that fight. I really do. And even though we all talk about, oh, Aspinall's really quick, he moves like a middleweight or a welterweight, when you have got a guy like Alex Pereira, the speed difference, you'll see it, and his counters, like the left hook counter. We talk about Tom Aspinall raising up his chin in the air. Alex Pereira's got that good left hook. He will find that chin if Tom Aspinall messes about on the feet too long. That's why I'm predicting Tom Aspinall to win by like a submission, because if he does what he did to Andrei Arlovski when he was shot for that takedown, he will beat him just because of the weight alone. But I'm scared about that fight. So on paper, he should, but I can see a scenario where he's way too confident because he's bigger than him, he carries more power, he'll think, because of the weight class, and he's a proper like 6'5" guy. But Alex Pereira's quite big as well. He's 6'5". Look at him against Fury, he looked tall. So there's a lot of small things that go into it. But if you want to win that fight, if I'm Aspinall, you have to shoot in early. And that's how you beat Pereira. You shoot in early and you look to hold the position. You don't look to stand there on the feet with him, because it never ends well. Countering is way too good. Fight IQ of kickboxing, too good. Right, Diego Lopes versus Danny Ige. What a strange fight. And I say that because Brian Ortega, man, for God's sake, why couldn't it have just that fight have been called off in the morning? But you have to give credit to Danny Ige and Lopes, because Lopes should have been like, no, I don't want to fight. Like, look what Stephen Thompson did when Michel Pereira didn't make weight. He didn't want to do it. And he wanted to get paid for making the weigh-ins and all that, but I don't even know what happened with that situation. But anyways, Lopes did it. And I want to see him in a 5-round in it, because watching back that fight now, one thing that Lopes does, it's exciting, but he's very reckless with his striking. Danny Ige fought a bit passive earlier on, because if you actually look, like even the coach said, what Lopes does is like a car crash. He comes into the pocket, he starts swinging wild hooks, he kind of strikes a bit like Clay Guida, but with more power and like a knee up the middle. pretty much. Like, he'll throw his hooks and then probably either try and grab the clinch and look for that knee and do that constantly. There's no jabs, there is no crosses by Lopes. And in a weird way, Dan Igue's striking should favour him in this type of fight, but it looked like he was too scared to like throw off that jab. He was very inactive early, and that's why he ended up losing the round. And then he started going for takedowns, and that was one like strange thing. Like, fair enough, he took it on short notice, but trying to grapple with Diego Lopes, who's coming in bigger than you, and you have not had your full training camp, it's not a smart idea to do. So when he was doing it, pretty much, what happens? He gets reversed, gets his back taken, and you know how good the body triangle is of Lopes. You're not getting out. And then he's fighting for that rear naked choke. He can't get it because we all know that Dan Ige is a good BJJ black belt. Like, he knows how to defend against that type of stuff. But Dan Ige actually has got some serious power. But he never let it go until like the third round. And in the third round, finally, he was starting to like let his hands go, and Lopes was getting tired, and that makes me think a 5-rounder is what we need to see, because if you put him against a guy who's got a good chin and who is hard to finish, like, yes, Brian Ortega's been dropped in fights, but he's got good survivability, if that's even a word or a phrase people use, where he can somehow find a way to just stay into the fight, even if he's getting battered, and kind of grow. Like, he had a good later half in the fight with Volkanovski. I can't say good, but he had a better. And I think against Lopes, make that a 5-round fight. If they want to do it in the spear, fair enough. But I think he will struggle because it depends how good Brian Ortega does at weathering the storm. Because earlier on, the car crash is going to happen. And most people crumble from the car crash. But what he can do, I can see a fight where Lopes wins the first 2 rounds, and then Brian Ortega comes back 3, 4, and 5 and wins the decision, because Lopes didn't look like he had a 5-round cardio. Like, he looked really gassed, like really, really gassed. And if Dan Ige just kept him up and carried on striking on the feet, I thought the KO might have been coming. But because he didn't, it just led to pretty much Diego Lopes being able to survive. And I was like, fair play. It was on short notice. He probably knew he wasn't going to win that fight. He just took it anyway because he knew he'd get loads of money. And he likes fighting. But poor by Dan Ige. But he took it on 4 hours notice, so I can't really moan about it. But anyways, who should Dan Ige fight next? I think they'll give him like a fairly good opponent because he came in on short notice against Dan Ige. Maybe an Alex Caceres would be an interesting fight. Because I don't know if the UFC are actually going to still do that fight with Mariscal, because he was training for it. But are they still going to do it after he just had the fight here? I don't even think he'll want to do it at this point. Like, I know he didn't take significant damage, but he might have like hurt his hand and stuff, and like fighting in about 2 weeks. No, 3 weeks. Would he want to do that? Not sure. Right, Roman Dolidze versus Anthony Smith. For me, this was a very, very boring fight by Dolidze, from what I've seen from him, but it was like he played very safe, because the Dolidze I know, he likes to walk people down, march them down with like crosses and keep pushing them back. But I think the reason he couldn't do that is because of the weight. Look at how big Anthony Smith's back looked compared to, no, not like that, but back looked compared to Dolidze. Dolidze, to me, he looked kind of small out there. The commentators were saying he looked big. He didn't look like a light heavyweight. He looks like a middleweight out there. And he has fought a light heavyweight in the past. But Anthony Smith looked like a full-blown heavyweight out there. And that's how big some of these light heavyweights really are. So, for Roman Dolidze, because of that win, he's probably going to get a top 10 ranking. But I'm starting to think that Volkan Ozdemir, he got that win over Johnny Walker, so he's going to want to fight much lower down. And I think it's only right to do that. So, maybe, would they want to do that fight? Dolidze against a Petrinho. But nah, that's boring. I can just see that going to a boring decision. I want a guy who's going to have to make him work hard. So maybe Carlos Ulberg. I know that fight got called off, but Carlos Ulberg versus Roman Dolidze. That is an interesting fight. Or if you want to push him further down, and Nikita Krylov, because Nikita Krylov don't put in boring fights. He always makes a fight like a war, kind of. And he can make dumb mistakes, which can lead to stupid things happening. But you know what? Yeah, I'd do that. If you want an entertaining fight, but the more logical, rational one that the UFC would do is like an Allberg or Victor Petrinho. But Krylov shooting in aggressively, it would actually force him to use the ground game. Like Anthony Smith weren't shooting him for takedowns. He's just out there to start complaining about his family and start throwing like fakes and missing with right crosses pretty much. Like, it weren't good by Anthony Smith, and I still think he's washed up. But Dolidze, to me, again, it was both on short notice, so what was I expecting? But really, I thought a finish might have happened, but it didn't. Right, Garry versus Michael Venom Page. First of all, my thoughts on the fight. No, it was not a robbery. I'm looking at the polls of who thought they won the fight. A lot of people are going for MVP, but I feel like a lot of people are picking MVP through hate of Ian Garry because of his ego and all of that. And I knew this would happen. I knew it would be a controversial win. But for me, Ian Garry unfortunately won the fight, turning into Ian Garamagomedov or whatever you want to call him. Because what the hell was he doing? It worked, but I've never seen Ian Garry go out there and grapple like that. I've seen glimpses of it. I think he tried to even do it with Neil Magny near the end of one of the rounds, but he didn't look like the type of guy who I expected to go out and grapple with MVP. But again, this won't improve his name value or anything, because yeah, he beat MVP, but when people go back and watch the fight for what happened, anyone can beat MVP. That don't impress me. When I say anyone who can grapple, who uses their brain, cough, cough, Kevin Holland could have, can beat this guy. And that's all you've got to do. So anytime he comes up against a grappler, he crumbles. Logan Storley in Bellator, I remember watching that fight live. Out-grappled, hugged against the cage. He don't know what to do. Like, when people use mat returns and keep dragging him down, he doesn't really have good scrambles. He looks like a fish out of water on the ground. So what did you think was going to happen after that first round? He was just going to get out-grappled. But to be fair, the second round, MVP, Ian Garry's not going for the takedowns as much. He has exposed himself as no longer the best striker in the welterweight. I didn't think he was, but he claimed to be it. But if you are too scared to strike with Michael Venom Page, yeah, you're training with Damian Maia and you're shooting for the legs like that and shooting him for takedowns, I'm not putting him in that level. I actually think MVP is a better striker than him. And I've got to give him the benefit of the doubt, because I thought Ian Garry was a better striker than MVP. But I don't think he is. Because, like Ian Garry said, MVP will set in traps, bouncing on the toes side to side, draw you in, then look to use that right cross. But to be fair, how the hell did Mike Perry beat Michael Venom Page? It was in BKFC, but still. One fight where you're like, how the hell did that happen? So, for MVP, again, he's in the Wonderboy Thompson category, but do I want to see him fight Wonderboy Thompson? Absolutely not, because that is a boring fight. And he'll admit it himself. They won't fight each other because they're friends, but they're both quite defensive styles. You put them two together, they're both going to be staring at each other. Ian Garry, fight Colby. But I've now made my mind up that Jack Maddalena would destroy Ian Garry, because if he can defend well against Gilbert Burns on the ground, who has got a far superior jiu-jitsu threat to Ian Garry, Jack Maddalena will stop Ian Garry's takedowns, as long as he doesn't start jumping for guillotines and stuff. And then when they're on the feet, he will just jab him, and Ian Garry's body shots will be open, but I can just see Ian Garry being put on the back foot, because that's what he does a lot. You can put him on the back foot, and then that's where you start using your jab, and then pretty much working the body. Because the more you work the body, as long as Ian Garry's not throwing too many knees, he'll be ready to stop the takedown threat. So, Michael Venom Page, I've said it before. If Buckley I was going to say Buckley. But then we all know what's going to happen if he fights Buckley. So welterweight's a weird division, because you've got a lot of people in that division where I'm like, if you put him with Michael Venom Page, he's just going to go and try and grapple with him. So, maybe this would be interesting. I don't know when he was going to be back, but a Li Jingliang against Michael Venom Page. But again, he ain't ranked. So, they're probably looking at a ranked opponent. But no, actually, no, he don't deserve a ranked opponent. All of them above are horrible matchups for him. So, really, you're looking at fun matchups. Maybe a Michael Morales. Interesting. But a good one could be a Jeff Neal. But I want to look at strikers. I don't want to see any grappler with him because you know what will happen. He'll get his back taken and submitted. But anyways, yeah. Joe Pyfer versus Marc-Andre Barriault. For me, Marc-Andre Barriault, again, looked like a fish out of water. He looked intimidated by Joe Pyfer. That last loss, you've got to remember, it was his first 5-round main event. If you're 5-rounding main eventing against a guy with good cardio who can survive in a fight, it's not going to end well. And it didn't. He ain't a fraud. It was just a bad matchup on paper. He would have been better off fighting in a 5-rounder against a guy who hasn't got stupid levels of cardio. So, who would I like to see Joe Pyfer fight next? He wants Paul Craig, but come on. Picking, asking to fight Paul Craig at this point was like calling out Mike Jackson. They can't strike. They've got no chin. That is a round 1 KO written all over it. So you know what? I know it would be an interesting fight. I never thought of it until now. Joe Pyfer, Chao Baraujo. Very interesting fight. Or even a Chris Curtis. They're the type of fights I want to see. I want him to have that step up. I think Joe Pyfer's the type of guy who could KO a Kevin Holland. I don't want to see that. Or another interesting fight, a Michael Oleksiejczuk. But again, I think that guy can just walk through him, power. Because Michael Oleksiejczuk, he just walks people down. He'll walk into that right overhand. And the way he flatlined him as well, it looked weird. It looked like one of those goofy R moments. He hits him, that overhand, that he kind of gets rocked. And then it's the punch that don't even look like it was the hardest one that makes him face plant into the floor. Interesting. And for Marc-Andre Barriault, I don't even know with him. Honestly. Like, he will just... he ain't that exciting. So, Marc-Andre Barriault. Why don't we do him against Michel Oleksiejczuk? I think that would be an interesting fight because all he is pressure. He likes to walk you down. Not guys full of power. Because to me, he ain't that powerful, Marc-Andre Barriault. Yeah, he gets all these KOs. You're going to be like, he does have power. No, the power comes from when people are tired. You don't go out there in round 1 and just flatline people. You don't do that. He wears them down and then finishes them. So, Michel Oleksiejczuk for me, I'd like to see. Right, Andrei Fili against Cub Swanson. For me, robbery. No, you know what? I won't say robbery. I think that's a bit of a push. Nah, you know what? I'm sticking by robbery, and I'll tell you why. From rounds 2 to round 3, people will say that Fili was landing the cleanest strikes. I'm not sure about that. And I'll tell you why. Because he was trying to shoot for the legs. He was backing into the cage. Like, near the end of that second round, he looked like he was going to get almost finished. That right hook by Cub Swanson was landing. And he was struggling to read the striking pattern of Cub Swanson because hands were down. He weren't throwing enough push kicks or any kicks to the head. So he was just forcing a boxing fight between him. And he could not get his rhythm going like it was in the first round. And even then in the first round, there was glimpses of Cub Swanson, which was making me think that he was going to end up winning that fight. And look what happened. He ended up getting robbed. I was trying to think a bit more rationally after the fight, but when I actually think about it deep down, he actually was robbed. Like that third round was a striking clinic. Putting him up against the cage, hits him with one shot to the body, then leads off the same hand again to go for a hook. And he was just backpedaling, shooting for takedowns. Now he's struggling to get the takedown. And then he's backing off and he finishes off the round worse and he looks tired. He lost that fight. It was as clear as day. I don't know why they gave it to him. Maybe it was in revenge for robbing Hakeem Dawodu in the last fight. But obviously it don't work like that. So Cub Swanson won. And if I was looking at an opponent for Cub Swanson, honestly, I'd look at Ojeka Sarigi. You know that guy who got submitted by Weston Wilson? And I want that fight because that guy is very aggressive early. He rushes in for knockouts. The only problem is if you bring it down to the ground, which I don't think Swanson will do because he prefers to strike. But he has got a good judo threat, I believe. But he won't use it, and he'll just look to try and strike with him on the feet. And I think that's actually a good matchup for Sarigi and how dangerous he is on the feet. The only problem is when it hits the ground. So yeah, I want to see that. And for Andrei Fili, Jamal Emmers, that would be an interesting fight. Emmers ain't got a great chin, but he can be very technical with his striking at times. Like, he was doing better than Landwehr early, and he can kind of hit hard early, but then his chin gave out, and Nate Landwehr, you know what his style is, pretty much in your face the whole fight, and pressure. You're hitting him with good punches, but he comes back forward, lands another two on you, and he just wears you out and finishes you. Gene Silva versus Charles Jourdain. Oh my god. Gene Silva is very good. And I did pick him to win the fight, and I thought it'd be by a third round KO. But the fact he did it like that, brutal. Because one thing about Jourdain is, when the striking is not going well, he just resorts to going for takedowns. And when the takedowns don't work, he kind of looked like he was out of it in the second round. He kind of didn't look like his head was in a good space, like in terms of after being dropped. Because what he would constantly do is pretty much throw a kick, stay out of range, and look to pretty much either shoot in on him or land like a cross to the head. And that does not work. It really doesn't. And it doesn't work against a guy like that because Gene Silva's very patient. With the power and knockouts he gets in round one, you would think he's the type of guy who's very aggressive, but he ain't. But it's when he hits you, one of those fighters where when he touches you, he lands in the right area to drop you and cause like severe damage. And that's what he did over Charles Jourdain. So, Gene Silva, how about we scrap that fight Chepe Mariscal was going to have with Danige, I believe it was. And now, let's give him Jose Mariscal, but move it to a later date. I think that's the type of fight we should look at. You beat him, look at a ranked opponent. Well, that's what I'd do anyway. And for Charles Jourdain, you know what? With Charles Jourdain, first time I believe we've seen him knocked out in the UFC. I think a fight that we could see in the near future is probably a Melquizael Acosta against him. That is a UFC fight that they'd make. But then again, it seems a bit boring. So you know what? What we could do, this would be very harsh by the UFC. Shelia Nudem-Wake against Charles Jourdain. Because one, I don't know, because he'll get submitted. One thing about that guy is he gets submitted a lot, but he has power, like extreme levels of power. Like when he touches you, you can go down. So that probably wouldn't be a good matchup to make for Jourdain. But he's coming off 2 losses now. And I'm thinking, you know what? You might as well do it. If he can't beat Jourdain, then he's probably out of the UFC. But if he gets a win like that, it's a very good one to get under your belt. But the one thing I would fear about him is giving away his back and getting submitted. But earlier on, he has like extreme levels of power. And if you get dropped by a guy like that, like Charles Jourdain hasn't fought like very powerful featherweights. He's fought a lot of guys who are either technical or they're light with their punches or will shoot for takedowns. Payton Talbott versus Yanis Ghemmouri. Oh my god, when you're talking about a guy getting cooked and violated, it was that fight there. Payton Talbott literally made a video, well, in the video, telling his opponent how to beat him. This guy is definitely going to be in the rankings. I'm starting to think this guy could probably be a top 5 bantamweight. I'm not shouting champion yet because I haven't seen him against a high-level grappler. I've seen him against a grappler. He got taken down a few times, but was able to survive and then get back up and get the finish. But I'm not going to get too excited and start screaming champion. But he, for me, I don't think he's O'Malley. I think he's different. Because I'll say it again, he doesn't have the footwork of an O'Malley. O'Malley doesn't just walk you down. He's kind of like got a good footwork. He can counter you. He can go forward. But he's not just a purely walk you down striker, one punching people like that. Nah. He'll light you up with combinations and has got a good looping cross. Talbott don't throw a looping cross. He pretty much just throws a straight cross and it put Yanis Ghemmouri down. Like when he got knocked down, he had no idea where he was. I don't know what the UFC were thinking giving that guy a go. Because that guy, he looked lost. And that was a good call out by him, calling out Adrian Yanis. A good matchup. He's doing the right thing because I think if he was to call out a guy like Said Nurmagomedov, that could be a dangerous fight because he'll definitely shoot at him. Or a Montel Jackson he could have looked at. But I like the idea of what he's done because he knows Adrian Yanis is a boxer and he'll want to trade with him, but he's at 125. Payton Talbott's bigger than him. That is a perfect matchup again for Payton Talbott. And I don't think the power that Yanis has is good enough to put away a guy like Payton Talbott because Talbott can take proper, like, powerful shots to the chin and come forward and give you one. And I can guarantee you, Adrian Yanis' power, it was not like Talbot. Talbot literally flattened the guy in 20 seconds. It's not just that. When he cracks people with punches, you see them immediately go backwards. Like, he hits so hard. So hard. And you could argue that Yanis hits hard. But Yanis, don't move his head. You don't move your head against Payton Talbot. Talbot can take your punch, but you can't take his. So I can see a knockout happening. But if Talbot really wanted to take the... He could have called out like a Garbrandt. But again, we all know what would happen. If he fought Garbrandt would have to turn into a grappler to win that fight because he would get ironed out on the feet. But I'm surprised. That would also be an interesting fight. So yeah, after that, beats that guy, depending on how he beats Yanis. Like if he flatlines him in like 30 seconds, we're looking at another fight for the belt. Not the belt, what am I on about? For the rankings, so yeah. Right, Martin Buday versus Andrei Arlovski. For me, this is again a very boring fight. It was so boring. I don't even care who won that fight because it was just a snoozer for heavyweight. Like hugging, pretty much just clinching onto each other. There was nothing special about that fight in any way, shape or form. It was just, I'm going to hug you, dirty boxing, and that's it. Extremely boring. So, who would I like to see Martin Buday train next? Not train, he trains with Aspinall. Who would I like to see him fight next? You know what? What I wouldn't mind? A Romanov. And I'll tell you why I've picked Romanov. Because with Romanov, you're not going to be able to just do his style. Romanov will look for takedowns. And I believe he can get it over a guy like that. So, I think Martin Buday, he lost to Gaziev. Now he's got Andrei Arlovski on his win. Now he's got Andrei Arlovski under his belt. We could have a look at that. I would look at even a Marcus Lima, but I've just remembered. He took severe damage, remember. Ray Tsuruya versus Carlos Hernandez. He was getting cooked on the ground. This Ray Tsuruya is legit with the grappling. But who do I want to see him fight next? I want to see him fight maybe a lower rated flyweight. You could give him a Suma Jadiri. No, I'm joking. If you do that, he'll enter the fight a heavy favourite. So, no, you know what? A Jimmy Flick. I would like to see that. That is a good matchup for Jimmy Flick. And again, it would test how good is Tsuruya on the floor. And for Carlos Hernandez, do a Suma Jadiri. They're both coming off 2 losses, I believe. And they're both strikers. Suma Jadiri has a lot of power. But he can bottle fights. Like that fight against Machado, he was rocking him all over the place. And ends up like crumbling and getting submitted with a triangle. So, Sumajiri for me, fight Carlos Hernandez, because Carlos Hernandez is a loose. He's quite good on the feet technically with his striking, good jab, good footwork. But when he comes up against a guy who can bring him down, he's shown that he can give away his back and get controlled or submitted. Right, Vinicius Oliveira versus Ricky Simón. I actually have a proposal for what we could do here. First of all, what a good performance. He was beating up Ricky Simón. You had the guy doing Rabona kicks in the third round at the end of the fight. And Ricky Simón, I'm not impressed whatsoever. Like, he has fallen off a lot. Like, he can't get takedowns as much anymore. Yeah, you could say he's coming against guys with good takedown defense, but he used to average like 4 takedowns a fight, probably more. And his takedowns are like, they're getting worse, and he makes poor decisions on the feet. Like, he gets the takedown with Vinicius Oliveira, and what does he do? He lets him stand back up when he's already getting cooked on the feet. And he's trying to outstrike a guy like that. Yeah, he dropped a guy like Jack Shaw, but again, his striking's mid. It really is. Even at the time, he wasn't a world-class striker. And then you got Vinicius Oliveira, whose striking is just very creative. He was beating him up on one leg at one point. Like, he shot to an underdog, I believe, after the second round. Even though it was 2 rounds up, he went to underdog because he hurt his leg. And Ricky Simón didn't take advantage of it. He didn't kick the leg. He didn't look to shoot in on the injured leg, like the right leg, I believe it was. So no wonder the fight ended the way it did. But for Vinicius Oliveira, that is a very good win. And that's why I'm saying that's one guy who might get pushed a bit early. And I wouldn't blame them. 28 years of age as well. Like, he beat the guy who beat Merab, which sounds really weird on paper. But I was thinking, I don't think the UFC will do it. But a very interesting fight, which it would never main event until they got more wins under their belt, but I would actually like it. It was a Payton Talbott and Vinicius Oliveira. Because with Vinicius Oliveira, they will never do it. He is very, like, hands down, aggressive. If he did that against Talbott, he would get knocked out cold. It's just clear as day. But one thing he does offer is power, like severe levels of power. And I've seen Payton Talbott be cracked on the chin a few times. Like, imagine the guy who performed best against Talbott isn't even in the UFC anymore. He was on the Contender. What was his name? I've forgotten it already. I think it was Tracy Cortez brother, Reyes Cortez or something. And he looked all right in there. But then again, he was eating uppercuts and stuff, and he didn't get knocked out. So that would be a banger. But they won't do it. Because he's kind of new, they'll probably give him, and Payton Talbott wants an Adrian Yanez anyway, they would probably give him, I'm not going to lie, would you be interested in him and Munin Gafarov? Interesting. So for Ricky Simón, Davy Grant, that would be interesting. A lot of feints, but I think the takedowns, he should be able to get them. But then again, he's very creative, this guy, Davy Grant. And he's very, like, he's got a good chin, but he's very submittable. And I think it's the type of fight where, I don't know though, because I'm starting to think, I don't rate the takedowns of Simón, but this is one guy where he could take him down. But knowing him now, he'll probably end up striking with him and then just winning a decision. That's the type of fight I see happening between the two. But that's the fight I'd want to see next. Thank you for watching. Talk to you soon.